The federal government has taken critical steps to reinvigorate the National Addressing Council in a bid to address challenges associated with the addressing system in Nigeria. So a new NAC and a technical committee is to be inaugurated next year to drive the country's agenda on planning, economic and financial inclusion, as well as ensuring an effective national addressing system. The decision was taken on Wednesday during a pre-meeting of the council chaired by Vice President Kashim Shettima at the presidential villa. The Vice President described the move as essential for improving service delivery, enhancing urban planning, and also driving economic growth.
This is the purpose of our gathering today. And for too long, we have pleaded with the idea of creating a robust addressing infrastructure. It was about 7 years ago that our predecessors breathed life into an intervention that led to the creation of the National Addressing System Initiative. In so doing, they inaugurated the National Addressing Council, tasking it with providing strategic direction and guidelines for the initiative. The NAC was also charged with conducting periodic revisions of the national addressing policy to ensure alignment with our technological advancements, socio-economic realities, and policy objectives. And this is more than complicated systematic addressing mapping. It undermines trust in address verification, and the consequences ripple far and wide. Inefficient governance, logistical bottlenecks, delayed emergency responses, and the exclusion of many Nigerians from the financial services.
Let's turn our attention now to our conversation today. Nigeria and South Africa have fully operationalized the Joint Ministerial Advisory Council on Industry, Trade and Investment to enhance economic cooperation between the two leading African economies. President Tinubu and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa made that decision on Tuesday in Cape Town, South Africa, at the Nigeria-South Africa Business Roundtable. President Tinubu assured that Nigeria is open for business and indeed ready to provide stability, security, and the rule of law for businesses to thrive. He committed to addressing issues discouraging South African investors from growing their businesses and franchises here in Nigeria. President Tinubu also called on South Africa to reciprocate by allowing Nigerian companies to operate and flourish in South Africa.
Let us connect Nigerian youth and the South African youth and leverage their potential for development. Many South African companies such as MTN, MultiChoice have found their way into Nigerian market, while Dangote, Access Bank, and others financial institutions have also entered the South African market. But that's not enough. I cannot pretend that all this is gone perfectly well. I ever believe we can identify the gaps and challenges, including persistent irritation in relations, and deal with them appropriately. To me, this is the real essence of BNC.
Joining me live from Johannesburg is international governance and development expert Tagbo Agbazua. Mr. Agbazua, thanks for joining us on the show.
Good afternoon, Nifemi. Greetings from a warm and hot Johannesburg. My pleasure. Greetings, viewers.
Great to have you on the show again. Some really interesting news from the 11th session by National Commission in Cape Town. I want us to begin with a very exciting news of simplifying the visa processes for Nigerian tourists and business people. We heard President Ramaphosa specifically saying that qualified Nigerians won't have to submit their passports in applying for a visa, and then you can get up to 5-year multiple entry visa. I got only 3 months in September. Do you think this is a game changer, considering what has previously been a challenge for both countries?
Well, thanks, Nifemi. I think certainly it does appear to be a game changer. There has been, over the past 2 decades, a number of rows and disagreements, and indeed agreements between South Africa and Nigeria with respect to the issue of visas. This has been quite a big issue between the two countries. At some point, a couple of years ago, it was agreed between the two countries that they will provide visa on arrival for their nationals visiting the other's country. However, Nigeria did implement this fully. So you could get a Nigerian visa as a South African national, applying online and being able to pay online. However, on the South African side, it wasn't possible. You could apply online, but then there were all kinds of glitches with respect to payments, with respect to online payments, which then would refer the person back to applying in person at either the Lagos or Abuja, consular offices. And then, I don't think Nigerians really got the best of treatments in terms of applying for visas. And as a result, a number of well-intended business visits and even tourist visits from Nigeria to South Africa, met with significant difficulty. So it would be great, if South Africa can implement their own side of the bargain this time around. I think it can't really be overemphasized. Right. Nigeria and South Africa are two of Africa's biggest and most influential economies. Indeed. They have to be able to collaborate better, and they have to be able to facilitate for businesses and citizens from both countries to be able to visit the other country.
Both countries have multiple memorandum of understandings between them, if not up to 30. I'm not sure of the number right now. So there are big concerns about implementation. I guess we'll see how that pans out in the future. But there were also conversations about ease of doing business and investment opportunities. You are a Nigerian doing business in South Africa. What do you consider the rooms for improvement for Nigerian companies operating in SA and those South African companies operating in Nigeria as well? What you are hearing from this binational commission, does it sound relevant in this regard?
Well, certainly it does sound relevant. There's a whole lot of opportunities for trade, investment, so doing business between the two countries, Nigeria and South Africa. A lot of opportunities. However, the balance of trade is actually skewed more in South Africa's favor. South Africa makes far more money from Nigeria than Nigeria does from South Africa. It's skewed even, it's maybe, to say conservatively speaking, maybe 9-1. Maybe Nigeria's got 10% of that trade. There's a lot of big South African businesses that are operating in Nigeria in the energy, oil, services, telecommunication, retail, to mention a few. Mainly for Nigeria. I mean, Dangote Cement is quite big here. Dangote Cement came in and great quality cement and very conservative prices. And, Dangote Cement's got a good share here. I remember some years back, This Day newspaper that opened up shop here in South Africa didn't get a lot of local patronage. Now we're also seeing some Nigerian banks already having branches here, like Access Bank and the like. So great opportunities. I mean, also in the spirit of the African Free Trade Continental Area Agreement, which technically makes Africa one country. This agreement provides for free movement of people, goods, and services across Africa. And indeed, I think it's pertinent that Nigeria and South Africa have got to be able to take the lead in terms of that kind of collaboration. I think it's absolutely important. Between the two countries, there are more than 36 MOUs that have been signed since 1999. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu of Nigeria did mention during the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission meeting that was held recently here. He did mention that it's not just about signing MOUs, but there has to be commitment, indeed, in terms of implementing those MOUs. I think also that the matter of Chidinma Adesina actually put Nigeria-South Africa relations strongly on the table. And, you know, we all see how it went. And it is indeed great that Chidinma did so well at the Miss Universe coming, being the runner-up. And I think one of the things that has been brought to the table is how can Nigeria and South Africa collaborate more? Indeed. The president of Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, did mention that the two countries have to collaborate in terms of, you know, providing the dividends of democracy to our youthful population. You know, so I mean, these are exciting. I mean, these news and these occurrences around, you know, South Africa and Nigeria wanting to deepen collaboration, deepen partnership, deepen their cooperation. President Ahmed Bola Tinubu of Nigeria did say that both countries have a shared historical destiny to collaborate towards the emancipation of the African continent.
Absolutely. And we've had that talk not once, not twice. Like you said, it's been an ongoing conversation. The question is, how do these commitments result into actual, you know, action? You talked about Chidinma. I recall being in Pretoria alongside a few other Nigerian journalists, engaging with stakeholders like the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, the Deputy Minister from the South African Presidency. We also had high commissioners from both South Africa and Nigeria. You know, what I notice is that you'll find out there is nothing significantly wrong at the government-to-government level, at least on the surface. The challenge is the people-to-people, where rubber meets the road, where even right in South Africa, you have Nigerians calling and say, you know what, things may not be as smooth as you are painting it with your media diplomacy. How do you think that that gap can be breached, you know, beyond all of these MOUs?
Well, thank you very much, Nifemi. I think, I mean, your comments show that you've got a good, intimate understanding of, you know, the situation on the ground. I want to say that South Africans are very loving people. They're amazing. I mean, I've lived in South Africa for 25 years. I've got a South African passport, South African citizenship, and I was really loved in this country phenomenally. I was firstly loved in South Africa. South Africa grew my capacity. I traveled across the world as part of South African teams negotiating on behalf of South Africa. And then at some point, Nigeria was like, wait a minute, he's actually one of ours. And then I was appointed under the Goodluck administration to help reform the governance of the tax sector in Nigeria, among several other projects. But what I'm trying to say is that South Africa is a really loving country. If you try other countries across Africa, imagine a Nigerian setting up business in North Africa. I mean, even in certain other countries, whether if you work for the African Union in Ethiopia, your spouse, it will be very difficult for your spouse to even get a work permit. Not much to even talk about countries like Botswana, where you apply to go there and you will never get it. It's very difficult to get a visa to Botswana for Nigerians. I mean, just to mention a few countries. So South Africa is really a very welcoming place for Nigerians. We've got a lot of Nigerians here excelling in all works of life and endeavor. However, part of the challenge has been, like you said, the people-to-people type of relations. Initially, there was not too much of a clamor, but as things kind of, as economically things got tighter in the country, then, you know, a lot of the local people who are sort of more, you know, the people with less means, then then you had all manners of initiatives like Operation Vuvuzela, where they started this campaign going street by street especially in what you call like your townships and your squatter camps. And then they started harassing foreigners, mainly Zimbabweans, but I mean, there's a number of Nigerians who have gotten caught up in the crossfire. You know, shop owners who have had all, their shops, including car dealerships, that have been burned completely to the ground in the wake of these sort of xenophobic attacks. So I think the big thing for South Africa is how to educate its population. How to educate its population about South Africa's role in Africa, about South Africa being part of the African continent, about the African Free Continental Trade Area Agreement, and about its own bilateral relations with other countries. I mean, a number of, it's a bit funny when someone, someone that's an unskilled labor sees maybe a Nigerian doctor driving maybe, a top automobile, and then they feel like this person stole my job, or this person is taking away my opportunities. So I think it's very important to have that kind of education. The South African population needs to understand part of the globalization, liberalization, the movement of people across the continent, and internationally being part of the new world, part of the current world order.
Indeed.
Part of the challenge, which I think a guy like Julius Malema from the EFF always highlights. He says, you know what, every time you find a European, someone from Southeast Asia, here in South Africa, they're taken to be tourists and legitimate. But every time they see their own Pan-African brothers or sisters, then they feel like, this person must be legitimate and needs to be questioned and needs to be ascertained. And whose legitimacy in the country needs to be asserted. I think
absolutely.
I think it's really important. I think it's really important for South Africa to put in some more effort to educate their local population, because what happens as well is that the local populations then put a lot of pressure on the Minister for Home Affairs and on the government, and therefore you would see that MOUs are signed, but at some point there is a pause on implementation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the government doesn't have the boldness.
Yes.
In terms of following through completely on commitments with a local population that may not fully understand the international relations between the two countries.
Mr. Baswe, it also sounds like a typical African problem that good governance can solve. Because when unemployment rate is heating up to like 50%, people want to blame it on something, and usually foreigners, get in the mix of it. But because of our time, quickly, let us turn our attention to the G20 Leaders Summit, holding for the first time in Africa next year. South Africa has now assumed presidency this December. There is the promise of supporting Nigeria's membership bid. But what form of collaboration is needed now to enhance support for countries of the Global South and also the 2063 AU agenda?
Well, I think, firstly, congratulations to South Africa for assuming the chairmanship or the presidency of the G20. I think it's really amazing. This is really awesome. We're really proud of South Africa assuming that particular seat. And the South African government, President Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, has assured his counterpart from Nigeria, President Ahmed Bola Tinubu, of South Africa's willingness and intention to support Nigeria's bid to join the G20. Increasingly, I think it is important for more voices, critical voices from the African continent to be reflected on the G20, and I think not less than that of Nigeria. And I think South Africa would welcome Nigeria's membership and participation in the G20. And then, you have two big voices from Africa, that are part of that membership. South Africa and Nigeria do have a critical role to play in terms of the actualization of Agenda 2063. It's about the Africa that we want. What kind of Africa do we want to leave for what kind of Africa do we want to see in our lifetime? What kind of Africa do we want to leave for our children and their children's children? An Africa where the youth are enabled, an Africa where there's security, where there's good governance, where there's democracy, an Africa where our resources, our natural resources are not a resource curse, but actually a blessing, an Africa where an Africa that can compete with the rest of the world favorably, and an Africa that can look after its own, look after our women, look after our children, look after our girls, and make sure that our youth are not hopeless, but have a thriving future. You know, there's no two bigger countries in Africa that can put their weight and support development imperatives, support a shift in the way governance is actually dispensed.
Indeed.
Governance should be dispensed in a manner that provides for full responsibility, transparency, accountability, and fairness to all stakeholders. It must be governance that is underpinned by discipline, you know. And I think that South Africa and Nigeria really do have a critical role to play in terms of creating that enabling environment for governance to thrive, for private sector growth and competitiveness, and the overall emancipation of the African continent in the spirit of Agenda 2063.
Absolutely. We're running out of time now. There's also the promise to collaborate during the African Union elections next year in February. South Africa is asking Nigeria to support its candidate for the African Development Bank president after Adesina's tenure expires in September next year. Nigeria is also seeking South Africa's support for re-election of Ambassador Adeoye as AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. In a minute, if you can, Mr. Gbazue, we have to leave now. You are very conversant with regional politics. Talk to us about the intricacies of such collaborations among sovereign states with competing interests. You know, how do they balance national interests with regional cooperation?
Well, you know what we say back home in Nigeria, the dog says, if I jump for you and you jump for me, then we're playing. It's scratch my back, I scratch your back. There is certainly the need, when you look at some of these elections coming up, and, you know, including Ambassador Adeoye, who's the current Commissioner for Political Affairs at the African Union. You know, both countries, what kind of horse trade, you know, and it's like, I give you this and then would you do that for me and so on. And I think never before than now has it become very, very pertinent in terms of South Africa really needing Nigeria and Nigeria really, really also wanting, really needing South Africa in terms of having their back. You know, South Africa carries a lot of weight in Southern Africa, and Nigeria carries a lot of weight in Western and Central Africa. And indeed, I think both countries, have a very, very good opportunity in terms of horse trading and negotiating with each other.
Absolutely.
In terms of being able to have access to those other blocks, regional or sub-regional blocks that the other countries have influence in.
Yeah. That's our time, Mr. Gbazue. Two largest economies in Africa with a very rich history of solidarity between them. Some say there's no limit to what they can achieve together if they make this relationship work. Thank you so much for your thought. International governance and development expert Tagbo Gbazue, live for us from Johannesburg. It's always a nice time having a conversation with you on the program, Mr. Gbazue.
Thank you very much, Nifemi. My pleasure. Goodbye, viewers.